All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a really hard look at the foundational principles of wealth creation, drawing straight from the source material, The Sacred Truths of Investing by Louis Navellier. And honestly, I want to challenge a very common, very human investing instinct right out of the gate. Because today, we're not just kicking around abstract numbers or dusty market theories, we're talking about your personal wealth and what it actually takes to grow it over the long haul. So, I want to kick things off with a pretty blunt question. Does pessimism cost you money? I mean, really think about your own experiences for a second. Have you ever, panicked during a sudden market downturn and just sold off your stocks out of sheer fear? Look, it's a completely natural human reaction, especially when the news cycle turns dark and all the experts are predicting absolute disaster. But we need to look at what the data actually says about letting that fear drive your financial decisions. To put this into perspective, between 2020 and 2023, the entire country suffered from what the text brilliantly calls a recession obsession. I mean, the word recession was suddenly everywhere. It spread like wildfire, mentioned in over 2.5 million articles. That represents a staggering 17-month run of negative sentiment across the country. To give you an idea of how crazy that is, it trails only the Great Recession itself in length. This media frenzy drove a massive, massive wave of market pessimism. Everyone was absolutely convinced the sky was falling, even though factually there was no actual recession happening at the time. But here's where the cold, hard math confronts our emotions head-on. Just 9 months later, we're talking from October 2022 to July 2023, the staggering reality set in. While the media was actively predicting doom and gloom, the actual numbers told a completely different story. The Nasdaq? It gained 39.9%. The S&P 500 was up 29.0%, and the Dow Jones notched a 20.4% gain. The takeaway here is literally undeniable. Indulging your inner pessimist during that media panic meant missing out on massive, and I mean massive, gains.
Which brings us right into Section 1, the price of pessimism. Look, it is incredibly easy to indulge the pessimist inside of us. It just feels safer to expect the worst, doesn't it? But doing so means completely missing the fundamental nature of stocks. They trade on the prospect of future growth. Without that prospect of growth, a stock declines, simply because investors take their capital somewhere else. If you always believe the worst outcome is just around the corner, well, you perhaps shouldn't invest in stocks at all. And that leads to a sacred truth from our source material. Pessimism generates losses, optimism generates wealth. And we need to be clear here. Optimism isn't just some fluffy feel-good mindset. In the stock market, optimism is a strict financial necessity. It takes serious hard work to look past the fear and see the upside, but it's an absolute requirement to stay the course. And staying the course is what actually generates your long-term wealth.
So, moving right along to Section 2, a foundation of bricks.
You might think Louis Navellier's data-driven investment philosophy started in some fancy high-rise on Wall Street. Actually, it began on construction sites in the Bay Area. Growing up, he spent his youth carrying hod, which, if you don't know, is the really heavy, repetitive work of carrying bricks and mortar to the bricklayers, working right alongside his father. But he realized pretty quickly that bricklaying wasn't just physical labor. It was a highly numerical exercise. To keep up the pace, he had to calculate areas, understand the complex relationship between height and stability, factor in the incidence of defective bricks, and even predict production rates. He was essentially out there doing algebra, geometry, and statistics on a daily basis, right there on the job site.
And that strict numerical foundation naturally paved the way for Section 3, the discovery of alpha.
So, picture this. It's his college days at Cal State Hayward, and a chance encounter gives Navellier access to a powerful new tool, a Wells Fargo mainframe computer. Going from a simple slide rule to a mainframe was basically like giving a gold prospector a diesel-powered excavator. It was a total game changer. He was tasked with building an index to perfectly track the S&P 500, but using fewer than 500 stocks. So, he selected a subset of 320 stocks to try and mirror the market. But he completely failed at his task. Why? Well, because his chosen 320 stocks actually ended up beating the broader market. This exhilarating failure revealed that there were real anomalies and inefficiencies in exactly how stocks were priced.
Digging into those anomalies led him straight to a massive realization about something called alpha. Pioneered by the legendary economics professor William F. Sharpe, alpha is defined as an uncorrelated relationship between a stock and the overall market. Now, at the time, textbooks focused almost entirely on beta, which really just measures how a stock moves with the market. But Navellier realized that proving alpha actually existed and then using it to value stocks was the real secret sauce. Discovering and utilizing alpha essentially became his North Star for identifying outsized returns through pure quantitative analysis.
Let's pivot slightly to Section 4, Rethinking the AUM Fee.
Okay, let's talk about fees, because this is where the rubber really meets the road. Nivelier took all of his quantitative confidence and his unwavering optimism and directly challenged the standard way the wealth management industry gets paid. And the contrast here is absolutely stark. The traditional model charges a standard 1% assets under management fee. As the text notes, think about what happens if a client with $1 million loses 10% of their portfolio. That's a brutal $100,000 loss. But under that traditional model, the advisor still collects a $9,000 fee. They're getting paid pretty darn well even when you're losing money. Now contrast that with Nivelier's alternative, performance-based model, managing accounts for 10% of the profits, billed annually in arrears. The crucial point here is that this structure truly aligns the interests of the investor and the advisor. But, and this is a big but, to offer that kind of model, you need a massive amount of confidence and optimism in your own math.
Which sets us up perfectly for our final part, Section 5, the return on optimism. Let's bring all this theory back to the real world with a tech giant we literally all know, Google. So Google had its IPO way back in 2004. Fast forward to the fall of 2021, and the stock took a completely terrifying 40% dive. We're talking to drop from $148 down to $88, all amid a general market malaise, mounting fears of layoffs, and climbing interest rates. Now, a strict pessimist would have cut and run right there, and honestly, many of them did. But for the optimists who stayed the course, the ones who fundamentally believed that Google could play a dominant role in emerging fields like artificial intelligence, well, the stock surged right back. Those who held on realized an eye-popping 5,100% total long-term return by the spring of 2023.
And this single number is what I really want you to take away today. 2,400%. That is the specific return on optimism alone for the investors who stayed in during that terrifying 40% dip in 2021 compared to the folks who got out. They simply didn't let the media fear dictate their actions. They trusted the underlying math, and they trusted the potential for growth.
It all really boils down to this fantastic quote from the text. The optimist is actively engaged in finding the silver lining, while by contrast, the pessimist is actively trying to get away. Generating real wealth requires actively looking forward. It requires the hard, uncomfortable work of seeking the upside when the downside is just the absolute easiest thing in the world to see. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative question. Ask yourself, are you building your portfolio with fear? Or are you building it with the math of optimism? It's a choice you have to make every single time the market dips and the headlines turn negative. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer on the foundational truths of investing. I really hope this structured look at the data changes how you perceive the news, the numbers, and your own path to building wealth. Keep learning, stay focused, and I will see you next time.